Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. It's live on ServiceNow and the ServiceNow community. And I am Rosalind Morville, and I'm delighted to bring you today the CMMC 2.0 accelerator on ServiceNow. I have with me guests from SecurityBricks, and I'm really excited to talk to you about what they have in the store, which is live and available today. And we're going to go through just a little bit about the product and then through a demo, and I'll introduce Sarah. But before we get started, I do have a little bit of a couple of housekeeping issues to get started. So if you can move on to the next slide, that would be great.
There seems to be a little bit of delay because I've moved slides.
Okay. Great. Well, we've got several people online. Someone was asking who's speaking. So it's Rosalind Morville and Sarah speaking. Sarah, can you see if you can unshare and share again and see if that helps?
You got it. How's that?
Great. I can see the housekeeping slide.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. So I'll just wait 1 second. So before we get started, I just want to let everyone know that they're automatically placed on mute. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A feature rather than the chat to ask questions. We'd be happy to chat or have you follow along with the conversation and add antidotes into the chat. But the Q&A is the easiest way for us to answer those questions and also follow up if we don't have time to get any questions answered during this session. We are recording the session and it will be available in the community afterwards. And at the end of the session, you will be prompted to fill out a short survey. We really appreciate your feedback. We're just using that internally to understand how we can better service you. Next slide. So speaking about this session, we're excited to have SecurityBricks here today, but we do have a lot of live risk webinars coming up in the near future because we are coming out with our latest release. So we've got what's new in business continuity happening on August 10th. And you'll be joined by me on that one, as well as the third-party risk management session on the 15th. And then we've got what's new in risk management on the 17th. Compliance case management, we're going to be doing an on-demand session for that. And then policy and compliance will wrap up our sessions at the end of the month. So definitely look forward to that. I think that is on the 24th, but all those sessions are available in the community, and we will have a sign-up form at the end of this presentation, so definitely check out for that. But we're happy to share any information on that in the chat if you do need more additional information on signing up. So next slide.
Hi, folks. So I'm Sarah Lang, and I'm going to go ahead and go through our agenda and talk a little bit about CMMC. So we're going to cover what the new DoD regulations are, what CMMC 2.0 is, and how the ServiceNow CAM and accelerators will be able to help your organization in achieving the CMMC compliance. And then we're going to follow that up by a short demo. SecurityBricks is a consulting firm here in the US. All of our consultants and employers are US citizens. And we stagger the 4 time zones here with a minimum of 15 years of experience that we bring, including DoD's experience as well. And our certifications for our assessors include CISSP, CEH, CRISP, and the SISM. So this covers a little bit about who we are and talks about our partnerships. So we are a FedRAMP third-party assessor organization. We're also ServiceNow partners and state ramp assessment organizations as well. And so we've taken all of our experience in these areas and brought together with ServiceNow an application to really help each one of you in managing and maintaining your CMMC. We already covered this a little bit about our focus areas. So our focus areas are here. We also have a platform called AppStone that helps to secure the software supply chain for third-party risk management. So a little bit about CMMC. So I'll cover a little bit about some of the acronyms you're going to hear. Things like CUI and FCI. So CUI is called Controlled Unclassified Controlled Information. So what this means is it's information that's not publicly available. They consider it sensitive information that, if possessed or published and available to people that did not have a need to know, could potentially lead to a security breach. FCI is information that's not intended for public release as well, but has a different classification. And this could be things like contracts, PII, right? Goods and services, right? And the delivery of those items as well. And what is the 800-171 framework? That is a NIST standard. That is what CMMC is built off of. So this is basically a security framework for all non-federal computer systems that need to implement that standard. And that is for anyone that is going to be working with the DoD that processes, stores, or transmits FCI or CUI data. Right now, what that looks like, it is currently implemented as part of DFARS, which is already there. And it is as a self-assessment today, which means organizations have to implement and do a self-assessment of the 800-171 controls, write up a system security plan, documenting their environment, and then they submit it currently through what's called the SPRS, which is the EMAS, and that gets submitted as a self-assessment. And then it is reviewed by the DoD to validate the implementation. What it's moving to is going to be to CMMC, which is the new framework that has been developed. Oops, let me go back there. That has been developed as well. And what CMMC is going to do is it's going to go ahead and require all contractors to protect the controlled unclassified information in all non-federal systems. So if you are planning on doing business with the DoD, either currently are or plan in the future, this will apply to you. There are currently 3 levels of classifications for contractors. The first 2 have been published, which is level 1 and level 2. And level 3 is currently in development. So we know that level 3 is going to be for the more sensitive data. Could be for the organizations that there's a higher risk level. And so the controls and how those controls will be implemented are going to be a little bit more stringent. This will become part of any RFPs that the DoD puts out. So anyone that's going to submit a proposal for an RFP or an RFI that the DoD puts out will need to meet this. And it also is going to pertain to any current DoD contractors. One key thing to know is that on here, it is also going to apply to all subcontractors for the bidding agency. So 800-171 is going to be broken out by it's 110 controls. And out of those controls, each control has a series of what they considered implementation requirements. So you have control A, and there will be maybe 2 or 3 things that you have to have in place in order to say that you've implemented control A. 800-171 is broken down around 15 control families. Each family covers a different aspect of protecting CUI. And it is mapped back to the NIST CSF for identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover functions. This is kind of a little table to cover the 800-171 framework. So what you'll notice here on this table, there's a significant amount of technical and administrative controls. So if you see, it's kind of balanced, right? It's not only do you have to have technical controls in place to protect this data, but you also have to have it documented. You need to have policies, procedures, and standards that are going to be used to implement those policies, and then those need to be put into practice. And it also includes gathering evidence for all of these controls so that you can satisfy your assessors to provide, to show that you not only have implemented them, but you're on ongoing continuous monitoring and that you're following all of your procedures that you have in place. So we covered a little bit about the CMMC levels. So let's go take a little bit of a deeper dive into these today. So what is level 1? This is considered the foundational level. So this is where you're doing an annual self-assessment. There's only 17 practices within level 1. So it's thinned down a little bit. There's less implementation requirements. This is considered basic cyber hygiene, right? Yes.
To interrupt for 1 second. There are parts on this when your voice is going out, your mic is moving a little bit. So I don't know, minimize that at all as possible.
Let me see if I can get a little closer. Is that better?
That's great. I think it's sometimes when you're moving around, but that's great.
Okay. So the self-assessments are going to be something where an organization isn't going to be required to have an actual third-party assessment organization do an audit against their controls, but they are going to have to complete their system security plan, and they're going to have to do a self-assessment of the controls that apply to them. And they're going to have to submit all of that documentation and attest to the reporting that they're including. Level 2 is a little bit more advanced. This is where you get into the controlled unclassified information. There is a total of 110 controls that apply. And you will have to have a third-party assessment organization conduct an audit and provide the assessment reports for your organization to validate your implementation. And then, of course, level 3 right now is TBD. And this is because it's still under development. It's been going through some changes. So online, you'll find some documentation related to what they think level 3 will be, but it is still currently in development. So when we talk about CMMC, it is very similar to, if anyone here on the call is familiar to FedRAMP, to a FISMA process, and which also aligns with FedMap, which is, what is your authorization boundary? All right, so this is where you really have to know your environment. This is where your asset inventory, your CMDB, really comes into play. Understanding your applications and your data flow is going to be key, because once you acknowledge and accept your authorization boundary, then you're going to have to start documenting everything within that boundary and any interconnections into and out of that boundary that may occur. That usually takes quite a bit of time for most organizations, right? Because you really are going to have solid inventory and understanding of your systems and their functions in order to be able to create this boundary. From there, there's this requirement to have what's called a system security plan. On average, the SSP typically will run anywhere from 350 to 400 pages for CMMC SSP. And in here, you not only have to document what your business is, what your product is, your organizational structure for security, your incident response, how you've implemented every single control of the 110 controls. You need to document your data flows. So it's a real detailed document that will be done. And you're really pulling in data from everywhere. There's from HR through IT, service desk, incident response, your security operations teams. All of this will come together. And then, of course, those two both are dependent on this asset inventory. What are all of the assets that are going to be part of that boundary? What are your security protection assets? Do you have a SIM? Are you currently in the cloud? Is it a data center? What types of tools are you using, right? And then your POAM. So a POAM is short for Plan of Action and Milestones. And what a POAM is it's basically a running risk register, right? So these are all of the gaps that have been identified within your boundary. So whether or not it's anything from not being able to implement a control to maybe having a system you can't apply a patch to, right? So anything that would present a risk to that data, in which case it gets documented. And that document gets monitored, and you continuously review and try to implement a defense in depth strategy to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. Once you get through those, your next step is really going to be about assessment evidence. So what are artifacts? So this is where you're going to be gathering screen prints, documents, right? Reports. Can you send me a report on the latest incident response event that we occurred? I need to have all the details of the event, starting from when it was initially reported all the way through to the investigation completion and the final after action report, right? That would be considered evidence. And then you're also going to be looking at your inherited controls. So if you are in a cloud environment, right, you will inherit some controls from that environment. Those controls will vary. Are you in AWS, GCP, Azure? Are you in the government, so say Azure government, or are you going to be in commercial? Which level are you? Are you using an E3 license or an E5 license? Because every one of those will come in and add an additional inherited controls that you'll be able to take advantage of. If you're using an MSSP for anything, you'll inherit some controls from them. And so you're going to need to work with those managed service providers to find out how they implemented certain things on their end and incorporate that as well. Okay. Vulnerability management, it's always really big, right? We know from all of the breaches that we have seen out there that it really just takes one system to have one vulnerability that a bad actor can take advantage of. And even if that system itself doesn't hold sensitive data, it may actually be able to lead somebody to hop through your network and get to that sensitive data. So there is high priority on vulnerability management within CMMC. All right, so critical and high vulnerabilities get reported. Application security vulnerabilities. A lot of times people stay at that level of vulnerability management looking at their infrastructure, but they're not looking at the applications themselves. You will be required to not only provide the latest scan results as an artifact, but they're going to want to look at things like your time to close, time to patch values. So some KPIs and KRIs will need to be provided as well. And they're going to validate that. They're going to look at the data out of the scans. They're going to say, how often are you scanning? How often are you patching? How is that patching cadence looking? Oh, and is that also lined up with the documentation that you've provided? They're also looking at vulnerability scanning at how are you running these scans? Are they credentialed scans? All right, so that you can actually get in and access and do a deeper dive into the vulnerability management of a system. Next is the security configurations. right? So C3PAOs, which is a certified third-party assessor, right? We're going to be asking for evidence in terms of IT asset configurations. We're going to want to look at your endpoint devices, firewall rules, your server configurations, cloud configurations. We're going to be looking not only at how it's been implemented, but what are your plans and processes for maintaining it? They are usually assessed against an industry benchmark. So the organization can decide, are we using CIS? Are we using STIGs? How are we adopting a security benchmark for hardening our systems? Is it potentially, are we using Azure's blueprints or AWS's gold images, right? As well. And then sometimes security configurations can become really difficult to report accurately, especially if you're in a multi-computing boundary, if you're using multiple clouds. Not all cloud providers provide excellent reporting to just export your configuration. So there's a lot of manual work that could go into having to document those hardening procedures that are in place. Next, we've got the pain of manual process, right? So currently CMMC assessments involve very manual processes to identify the assets, define the boundary, and gather all the evidence. You're managing and gathering information and working with all the various groups within your organization. You're looking at and managing, gathering information through your subcontractors, all your vendors and suppliers. You're also going to be looking at your MSSPs, your any SaaS service that you're signed up for and using within that boundary. You're going to be talking to and looking at your cloud service providers. So there's a lot of moving parts and pieces to putting the CMMC puzzle together. And that alone usually takes a significant amount of resource and time to gather that much information. And I'm going to throw a little monkey wrench in here. All your evidence that you have to use for your assessment cannot be older than 30 days. So you'll do this twice. Once as you're preparing and getting ready to make sure you can pass your CMMC audit. And then again, right before your assessment date approaches, you're going to have to go through the same function again to update all of your evidence that you've gathered. So now we're going to kind of go into how does ServiceNow help with this, right? So ServiceNow's CAM, the Continuous Authorization and Monitoring module, allows they assist in creating the authorization boundary with data from the CMDB. So this is huge, right? No manual mapping and spreadsheets that you're going to have to use. Creation of the SSP. So that alone, I mean, I've written SSPs, and I'm going to tell you is a significant amount of time that you're going to shave off your readiness and preparation for your assessment for CMMC. For those that have not had the joy of creating an SSP, you will find that you have to not only gather all this information from various groups, but now you've got to wordsmith it all together and put together, for example, access controls. You might have to gather information from your single sign-on group, your Active Directory group, your cloud group if it's not integrated, local accounts, user accounts, service accounts, privileged access accounts. And then you're going to have to take all that information and wordsmith it into a nice cohesive implementation statement that needs to go into your SSP. So imagine doing that for all 110 controls, and that's just part of your SSP. So being able to automatically create this by pulling in that information through the questionnaires is going to be a game saver. Next is the creation of control tests, which is including all the inherited controls. So what this means is right now, what you'll have to do is you're going to have to reach out and you're going to contact your cloud service provider. You're going to ask them for their inherited controls. They're going to provide you some piece of information or report, usually in Word, PDF, or Excel is the standard formats, right? And you're going to have to take that and go map in and copy and paste and write up your responses for each one of your controls that you inherit. And inherited controls, you're going to get three options. It's either not inherited, and it's up to you to implement. It's fully inherited, right? In which you, the organization that's using that CSP, will not have to do anything. Or it's going to be partially like a shared control. So they have a part to play in it, and you have a part to play, and you're going to have to marry those two together. Okay. Next is going to be your assessment workflow. So this is where, instead of having to go out and have meetings and send emails and gather all this information and keep it stored someplace, whether you're storing it in SharePoint or OneDrive or anywhere else that you're usually storing your documentation, you're managing it through spreadsheets, right? And so this is going to allow you to have a workflow that can go out and assign the controls to the correct internal and external owners, allow you to gather that evidence, gather their implementations, validate whether or not something's in place, and be able to review it all in a single location. And because it's built on ServiceNow, right, you're going to be able to use all of the wonderful rich features such as notifications and reminders, and dashboards and reports, and all the automation you're able to pull out. Next is going to be your vulnerability response integration. So being able to process and parse through all of that vulnerability data and pull out exactly what needs to be documented within your POAM and do that for you. So again, another use case for this, how many of you have ever run vulnerability scans or had to look at them? Usually the output is pretty significant. You've got a lot of data you have to parse through and try to figure out exactly which systems, what environment, what subnet, what's the vulnerability, what's the severity, can it be fixed, can it not be fixed, right? Is there a patch available? And this is going to automate that for you. So you don't have to spend all of that time going through all of that data on your own manually. Next is the asset visibility, right? Asset management is a key foundation to any security implementation. How do you protect what you don't know you have? How do you find the weakest link if you're not sure what you should be monitoring? So asset availability is going to give you all the visibility into your assets, which are within your boundary, and the data that you need to know about those assets, what's stored on them, what are they used for? Very key. Next is our CMMC accelerator. So this is where SecurityBricks come in. So what we've done is we've created two accelerators within ServiceNow. The CMMC 2.0 accelerator is built on CAM, and it's an application there in ServiceNow IRM module. We've currently published it as a free app on the App Store, and it comes with the NIST 800-171 content that includes authority documents and control objectives. It's a complete set of the questionnaires for both level 1 and level 2, with all the supplemental guidance and evidence requirements that you'll have to pull for each one. Next is our vendor compliance accelerator. That is currently built on the vendor risk management module in ServiceNow. And what that does is it's got a survey to help meet the contractual flow down for CMMC. And that content covers both level 1 and level 2, and it's full vendor questionnaires. It also includes reporting and dashboards for vendor responses. Where is this key? This one is that, CMMC contract does require that CMMC applies to all subcontractors. So what that means is if SecurityBricks was a DoD contractor and we had to be CMMC level 2 because we had CUI, any subcontractor, vendor, or partner that we were to use, whether it's an MSSP, whether or not it's CSP, whether or not it's another organization that's just doing some support for an application. If they have access to our systems or they have access to process, store, or transmit that CUI data, they also have to be level 2 CMMC compliant. And as part of your assessment, you will be asked for each one of your vendors, and you're going to have to validate whether or not they potentially would have some compliance requirements here, and you have to be able to assess them, validate that they have these 800-171 controls implemented. So now we're going to go ahead into a product demo, and I'm going to go ahead and switch my screen over.
While you're doing that, might I ask one question from the audience?
Sure.
Great. There's a question that came in that says, do you have a way to manage a shared responsibility matrix with a business partner or with other parts of your own organization?
We do. So as part of our advanced CMMC application accelerator, we automatically will pull in all the inherited controls and supporting information that you need to complete those within the application itself. So you don't have to do that. Switch this over real quick. All right. So Ken, I just wanted to verify, you can see my screen. I'll switch over. I'm switching screens.
We can see it.
Okay, so here I am on ServiceNow. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with the vendors since we were just talking about those, right? So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go ahead and start looking at my vendors. And I'm going to look at all assessments where I'm at, and you can see I can go ahead and create a new one. And this is just how easy it is. I'm going to create new. I'm going to select my vendor. Let's go ahead and select Acer here. I'm going to give it an owner. And then I'm going to select my assessment template. And let's go ahead and do a level 2 here. Okay. From there, I'll go ahead and save that. And say submit to vendor. Now that's as easy as it is to go ahead and use the vendor assessment here for CMMC. Now you can see that this has been submitted to that organization and their contacts so that they can go ahead and complete this questionnaire for us. Now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go ahead and sign in as that user. Oh. All right, so now I'm signed in as Acer, right? And I can see I have 2 assessments over here, and both of them are coming due soon. So I'm just going to go ahead and click over here, and I can see my assessments. So this is my new one here, and I haven't completed anything yet. And I have a due date that's not too far off in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And go right into my questionnaire. And here I can see each section. So, you know, if there's a particular section I want to start with, maybe I don't want to go in order, I can. Or I can come on over here and just say, let's just go down the list. So now I've got my questions, right? Does the organization limit information system access to authorized users and processes? Here's my guidance on what has to be implemented. This is where that follow-up, which is how does the DoD need you to implement this control, right? Their expectations is that you have each one of these in place. From here, I'm going to be able to look at that, say, is this fully implemented, planned implementation, or not applicable? This is really key. So planned implementation is important because, whenever there's a new standard, right, that goes out, like when PCI came out years ago, not everyone's going to have every single one of these controls implemented. So your vendor can come over here and easily say, oh, well, we do A, B, and C, but we don't have F, right? In which case, from your perspective, you want to know if you're not compliant with something, do you have plans to be compliant? So in this case, I'm going to say this is planned, and this is going to say, okay, well, when do you plan on having that implemented? Because I need to be able to manage this. If I know that we're having our audit in November of 23, I need to make sure your dates are going to be before that, right? So I'm going to come over here, show the calendar, and maybe I'll say, oh, the end of the month will be good. And now I can go ahead and describe the planned implementation. What does that give me as an organization is it's going to allow you when you're looking at this to say, okay, it's not in place today. They do have a date, which shows that they've actually done some planning. That date meets our timeline, but let's look at what they're planning on doing, because what if their interpretation is incorrect? What if they say they're going to do something to meet this, and you look at that and you say, oh, that actually isn't what they want, right? So this is going to get you ahead of that. Next, you're going to be able to come down and they're going to scroll right down and see their things and, again, fully implemented. Okay, describe how that was implemented. So you notice all of this information, right, is information that you have to answer those assessment questions and for your audit. So once they go through this and finish, they'll be able to submit this, right? I'm going to say this as draft because I'm still working on it. And once this is done, they'll submit that to you for review. Okay. Go ahead and I'm going to move this bar real quick. All right. So now what does this look like once we've got that vendor assessment back? Here. So now I'm going to log back in as a user that is in ServiceNow. And I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to go back into all assessments. And here's mine, right? I'm going to go ahead and look at this. Let me find one that actually has a response in here. In this case, we'll go ahead and say response received. Just find one for CMMC. And I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And now I can view those responses. And I can see based on the responses that they provided that it's got a very high risk rating. All right, so there's quite a bit of things they haven't implemented yet. So now I'm going to come in to view responses. And now I can go in and select and look at my controls. So I can see what they provided. And not only can I see what they provided, but then I can add in any internal comments that I want. So only our teams inside can see them, and it's not viewable to the vendor. I can provide information to the vendor, and I can flag this for follow-up because there's some remediation that needs to occur, right? And I can create risk items out of that. So here I can create my issues right here. And then when you need to provide your assessment evidence to your vendor, you can easily export these. So now, moving on from the vendors, we're going to go ahead and look at the other CMMC accelerator.
Sarah, can I ask you a question from the audience?
Yes.
So there's is there an option to check off the requirements of the assessment objective level for tracking?
Ahmed? So when you say assessment,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah, so we don't have that in the free version, but we can do it when we are implementing it for the client.
So it's possible, but not.
Yep.
Great, thanks so much.
Mhm.
All right. So now we're going to come over here and look at the CAM module in the CMMC Accelerator app. All right, and we can go ahead and I'm going to type in CMMC. And now you'll be able to pull up our security baseline. And now in here, this is what you're going to be doing internally, right? Because not only do you have to worry about your vendors and subcontractors, but you also have to look at how you've implemented these controls as well. So here I can see all of my control requirements, and I'm going to go ahead. These are authority documents that are already created and mapped out. I'm going to say new. It's not new there, sorry. Go into a control. And the right place. There. I'm going to be in the wrong spot.
Yeah, you have to go into the control objective and map the entities into it. Yeah, you were on the right spot. You just go into the, yep, right there in the citations. You can pick up the second citation.
This one?
Yes.
Okay,
Control
there we
objective.
go.
Control objective. My bad.
Edit. Okay. Sorry about that, guys.
No worries. You have to go into the control objective, not into the edit. Good.
Here?
Yep. You're good.
All right. And now I'm going to go ahead and edit the entity types. And basically I can come over here and select the entity type for access control. So this is the people internally that are going to be responding to access control questions. I'm going to hit save.
You have to move it to entity types. You have to edit and just move it.
There, whoops.
No. Yeah.
Got it. All right, there we go. Sorry about that, folks. So now I've got my access controls here. If I go ahead and refresh this, you will start seeing my controls have now updated to 4. And so these are all of those users that are responsible for access controls and what those entities are, right? So now I can say, well, I'm only going to send it to 1, or maybe I want to send it to all 4. And I'm going to say, go ahead and attest. So now it's going to create the attestation surveys and send those questions over to those assigned people so that they can go ahead and provide the information we need. So now if I go down and look let's go ahead and look at Able Tutor here. So in this case, I'm going to come over here.
You can just search my assessments or all assessments
Search my assessments. Okay.
in the CAM module. Mhm. Yep, you can just hit the assign to Able Tutor and right there in the filter.
Ah.
Yep.
That extra filter on there. All right. So then now we're going to come over here. For MP. So here we go. This is the one we did. Here's the one just now. So ready to take. I'm going to go ahead and click on this. And in here, you can see I've got these assigned to me, or Able does. And I can go right in and say, take assessment. And now I've got the questionnaires. I've got the guidance that's necessary. This time I'm implemented, describe my current implementation. You know, if it's not applicable, provide that rationale here as well. Okay. Control. And now I can go ahead and submit that and file that over so that it can be reviewed. So it's straightforward, being able to gather that information and have that ready to be reviewed and looked at internally. And then all of the information that you gather through both surveys is going to allow us and you as an organization to take that data and create the documentation templates that you're required to provide, such as the SSP and the POAM. Let's go back over here. Just want to check to say, are you able to see the product demo slide now? Or is it still showing ServiceNow?
You've got the product demo.
All right.
Oh, that was great, Sarah. Thank you so much for walking us through that and letting us know kind of the ins and outs of how that works. And your presentation was packed with so much information that I'm a little bit in overload. But we do have a couple of more questions that I wanted to throw in there if we could. If you want to go through this, I can talk through the end. But one of the questions was, will you be able to pull evidence and data from my Azure tenant?
Yes, so in our, when we do the implementations, it's not part of the app you can just download and use. We'll then be able to connect through the APIs in ServiceNow to pull that information automatically. So you're actually right ahead of it. We are just getting ready to cover this on the slide we're seeing right now. And basically all of that information and evidence will be able to be pulled down automatically from your CSPs and also through your other ServiceNow modules that you use. So if you're using CMDB or incident response or SecOps or DevSecOps or anything like that, all of those will be able to automatically pull that stuff in, which means instead of having to go through the manual process for each one of them, you're looking at a significant reduction in the numbers you're going to have to go through.
Another question that came in is, can you generate a POAM?
Yes. A POAM can be generated, and you know, if you have monthly requirements to submit your POAM, you would come in every month, generate that POAM, and it will pull all the up-to-date information. So if you have findings that are in your POAM and those findings close, or any kind of milestones get adjusted, then when you pull that monthly POAM, you'll be able to have all those up-to-date information in there.
Great. And I don't know if you know this, so we might be able to find out, but does the risk scoring use their BRM normalized scoring calculation?
I'd like Ahmad to answer that question.
Right. So we used the out of the box functionality for the scoring for this version for right now. Yep.
Great, that's fair. And how do I know which vendors need to be CMMC compliant?
So with your vendors, any vendor that stores, processes, or transmits, right, or has access to CUI data will need to be CMMC compliant. You will gather that information through the vendor profile so that you'll be able to see what that vendor does and for your organization. From there, if you don't have that information and it's something you need to do, then you could send out a survey to your internal vendor manager or to your vendor themselves and ask them if they could describe what their process is and gather that information. So there's a number of methods to get that information if you don't already have it.
Awesome.
The key thing is that once you've identified your boundary, right, and you know that this is your circle around your network diagram that's going to have to be CMMC compliant, then it's going to be a lot easier to narrow down what vendors work within that circle, right? So you kind of picture yourself taking a red crayon and drawing a circle around your network infrastructure picture and say, okay, anything within here, right? And so if it's in there, then you're going to be able to say, okay, here's my list of vendors that are working in here. Now I'm going to say what vendors, in there are doing what, and for some of them, it's going to be so straightforward and easy to know, and others not so much, right? And so that's where you're going to look at the vendor profile and see what they provide.
Awesome. So that's it for the questions from the audience.
Perfect. So our solution does an extension to the accelerator that's on the ServiceNow app right now. And this is going to be where we kind of covered a little bit, right? The cloud connections to AWS, to Azure, right? Others will be coming, where we can go in and automate those, do those connections into your CSPs, be able to automatically pull the evidence, pull down configurations, pull down what it is that you have in place and automatically score those for you. Then you've got your inherited controls we talked a little bit about, right? So, some of those are pretty straightforward, others are not. Everyone knows if you're in a cloud, right? Physical security is going to belong to that CSP because you don't have access to that data center. You're not managing that. But again, just saying that, oh, well, Azure does that for me isn't going to be enough for your assessment. So you have to be able to say, Azure's data center, this is the data center I'm in. This is the controls that they have in place at that data center. Here is the reference to their cage code. Here is the reference to this data center's FedRAMP, right, accreditation that shows that. And so that's what your CMMC 3PAO is going to be asking for. They are looking to say, how do you know that they meet these controls? And have you done your due diligence to verify that what they're doing is enough, right? You're on top of it, basically. You're not just passing it over to them. That's what they're looking for. The indicator templates, right? So to be able to automatically generate the compliance assessment results for the attestations, being able to validate automatically by pulling into the other modules that you use within ServiceNow as well to automate that. I mean, just think about it. So there's a whole section on incident response, right, within CMMC. So let's say you have ServiceNow incident response module. And it goes out and some of your controls are, do you test your incident response? What is the frequency of those testing? Do you have SLAs associated with your incidents? Have those been met? Right? Here's all these things you have to document. So now the indicator templates are going to be able to go out there and look at your incident response module in ServiceNow and check each one of these requirements and come back and say, here's your evidence. And yes, it's implemented and compliant. Next is your enhanced dashboards. Now, getting your required reports that you need to submit to your C3PAO, all right, is one thing. Those are absolutely necessary and save a ton of time. But internally, when you're managing projects like this, you're going to need a lot more dashboards. You need to be able to look at your metrics. How are we doing as we're getting ready? What does our readiness look like? Is there anything that we need to be paying a closer attention to? Do I have a bright red flashing issue, right, that I need to know now? Or are we looking pretty good? We're on track. We're not running into any issues. We're way better than we thought we would be by now, right? And so that's where these enhanced dashboards will come into play. It's going to provide you a quick glance and nice, easy reporting UI to be able to see where we are at any given time. Did you have a vendor that failed, right? Is it a key critical vendor? And then, of course, the validation. So as a CMMC C3PAO, being able to come in and actually be able to provide you with a review of your evidence and your responses and give you support and validate your control implementations is another option that is available, as well as doing what's called a mock audit. So what this means is if you'd like to be able to have a 3PAO come in and actually do a mock audit and help prepare your organization, those that will be part of the audit, on making sure that they're comfortable with answering the questions and what to expect from the audit and that they have the correct evidence and responses. That's also an option that's available as part of the extension from our solution.
So I think you just touched a little bit on this, but the question came in, can the platform generate policies or the SSP, and are we able to use this to collect and store evidence?
Yes, yes, and yes. Absolutely.